In 1513, a man sat alone in a small farmhouse outside Florence, stripped of his job, tortured for a crime he did not commit, and exiled from the only city he had ever loved. He had every reason to disappear quietly into bitterness, to spend the rest of his life resenting the city that had discarded him after years of loyal service. Instead, he picked up a pen and wrote the most feared book in the history of political thought, working in isolation on a farm far from the corridors of power he once walked through daily. And buried inside it is a truth so uncomfortable that most people spend their entire lives avoiding it, even though it explains exactly why some people command respect the moment they enter a room, while others beg for it and never receive it at all. His name was Niccolo Machiavelli. And here is the question that should stop you cold. What if everything you were taught about earning respect is not just wrong, but is actually the reason you keep losing it? What if kindness, fairness, and being liked, the very things you were told would make people respect you, are quietly working against you every single day? Stay with this, because by the end, you are going to understand something about human nature that most people never figure out in an entire lifetime. Machiavelli did not write his book from a position of comfort. He wrote it as a broken man trying to understand exactly what had gone wrong. Before his fall, he had spent years inside the halls of power in Florence, watching princes, popes, and generals up close. He noticed something that disturbed him deeply. The rulers who were loved by everyone were, again and again, the ones who ended up betrayed, overthrown, or destroyed. And the rulers who were feared, respected, sometimes even resented, were the ones who survived. This observation became the foundation for one of the most controversial sentences ever written about human relationships. "It is much safer to be feared than loved," he wrote, "if you cannot be both." That single sentence has been misunderstood for 500 years. Most people hear it and assume Machiavelli was telling people to be cruel. He was not. What he was actually describing was something far more subtle and far more relevant to your life right now than you might expect. He was describing the difference between two kinds of relationships, one built on affection that can vanish the moment it becomes inconvenient, and one built on respect that survives even when people do not particularly like you. Think about that distinction for a moment, because it explains something that has probably confused you for years. Have you ever bent over backward to be liked by someone, only to watch them walk all over you the second it benefited them? Have you ever noticed that the people who set firm boundaries, who do not chase approval, who are willing to disappoint others, somehow end up more respected, not less? This is not a coincidence. Machiavelli spent his entire career studying exactly why this happens, and his answer will change how you see every relationship in your life, personal or professional. He was not describing a rare quirk of politics. He was describing a pattern so consistent across human behavior that it shows up identically in a boardroom, a marriage, a friendship, or a schoolyard, wherever one person's need for approval outweighs their willingness to hold a line. Here is where the story gets uncomfortable. Machiavelli believed that love is fundamentally unreliable because it depends entirely on the other person's mood, convenience, and self-interest. People love you when it costs them nothing. The moment loving you becomes inconvenient, that love tends to evaporate with startling speed. Fear, or more precisely, respect built on consequences, works differently. It does not depend on someone's mood. It depends on their understanding of what will happen if they cross you. And that understanding does not evaporate just because they are having a bad day. This is why, Machiavelli observed, so many kind, generous, endlessly accommodating people end up taken advantage of over and over, while never understanding why. They assume that kindness creates loyalty. It often creates the opposite. It creates a quiet, unconscious belief in the other person that this individual will always give, always forgive, always show up, no matter how they are treated. Once that belief forms, something dangerous happens. The kindness stops being appreciated and starts being expected. And the moment kindness becomes an expectation instead of a gift, respect for the person giving it quietly disappears. So what actually creates respect, if constant kindness does not? This is where Machiavelli's ideas become genuinely useful, not as instructions for cruelty, but as a map of human psychology most people never learn. The first principle is this: people do not respect what they can predict and control. They respect what they cannot fully predict or control, because unpredictability, when paired with genuine integrity, signals a kind of strength that cannot simply be talked into existence. A person who always says yes, who never pushes back, who can always be counted on to absorb disrespect without consequence, becomes entirely predictable, and predictability, in the world Machiavelli studied, is the enemy of respect. Think about the people in your own life who command the most respect without ever demanding it loudly. Notice something about them. They are rarely the loudest people in the room. They are rarely the ones performing confidence for an audience. What they actually have is something quieter and far more powerful, an unpredictability rooted in genuine self-respect. They will help you, but they will not be used. They are kind, but their kindness is not a bottomless resource anyone can drain without consequence. And because other people cannot fully predict how far they can push before something changes, they instinctively tread more carefully around them. This is not manipulation. It is simply the natural result of a person who has decided their own boundaries matter as much as everyone else's comfort, and who lets that decision show up consistently in how they behave, rather than only announcing it when they feel disrespected. This brings us to the second principle, and it is the one Machiavelli returns to again and again throughout his most famous work. Respect is built through demonstrated strength, not claimed strength. You cannot simply announce that you deserve respect and expect people to comply. Machiavelli watched countless rulers try exactly this, insisting on their own authority through titles, lineage, or loud declarations, and watched almost all of them fail. Respect, he observed, is earned only through visible, consistent action. Not promises, not intentions. Action that other people can actually witness and remember. This is why so many people who beg for respect never receive it, no matter how hard they try. Begging is, by definition, an action of weakness. It signals to the other person that you need something from them that you cannot generate on your own. And the moment someone senses that you need their validation more than you value your own boundaries, the psychological balance of the relationship shifts permanently in their favor. Machiavelli understood something that modern psychology has since confirmed. Respect flows toward whoever appears to need it the least, and it drains away from whoever appears to need it the most. Here is a twist most people never expect when they first encounter Machiavelli's ideas. He was not actually advocating for cruelty as a strategy. He was advocating for something closer to earned unpredictability, paired with consistency in your own principles. A ruler, he argued, should be capable of both kindness and severity, deployed based on wisdom, not mood, not desperation, not fear of being disliked. The danger was never in being kind. The danger was in being predictably, endlessly, unconditionally kind, regardless of how you were treated in return. Consider a scene that plays out in ordinary life constantly, one that shows exactly how this principle operates outside of politics. A man at work consistently stays late, covers for colleagues, takes on extra projects without complaint, hoping this will eventually translate into recognition, promotion, respect from his manager. Instead, year after year, he watches less accommodating colleagues get promoted ahead of him. His manager likes him, genuinely, but liking someone and respecting them turn out to be two entirely different currencies, and only one of them tends to get rewarded with power. The manager has learned, without ever consciously deciding it, that this man will absorb any workload without pushback. That knowledge over time becomes exploitation disguised as convenience. and the man never understands why his effort never translates into the respect he was promised it would earn. Now picture the version of that same man who finally applies what Machiavelli understood 5 centuries ago. He does not become cruel or difficult for its own sake. He simply stops being predictable in his willingness to absorb more than his share. He says no to one unreasonable request, calmly, without apology, without over-explaining himself. The reaction from everyone around him is immediate and telling. There is a flicker of surprise, followed by a subtle recalibration in how he is treated going forward. Nothing dramatic happens, no confrontation, no explosion, just a quiet shift in how much space people assume they are allowed to take from him. That shift, small as it looks from the outside, is the entire mechanism Machiavelli spent his life studying. Machiavelli drew this conclusion partly from watching one ruler in particular up close, a man named Cesare Borgia, whose rise and fall became one of the central case studies in his most famous work. Borgia conquered territory quickly and ruthlessly, and Machiavelli, rather than condemning him outright, studied him almost like a scientist studying a specimen, trying to understand exactly what worked and what eventually failed. What Machiavelli noticed was striking. Borgia's early success came from decisive, visible action that left no ambiguity about where he stood or what he was capable of. His eventual downfall came not from being too harsh, but from a moment of miscalculation during his father's death, when he failed to secure his position while his strength was still visible to everyone watching. The lesson Machiavelli drew from this was not that ruthlessness always wins. It was that consistency, timing, and visible strength, maintained without interruption, are what actually determine whether respect holds or collapses the moment circumstances change. This raises an important question that Machiavelli's critics have debated for 500 years. Does this mean warmth and generosity are mistakes? Not according to Machiavelli himself, and this is the part most summaries of his work leave out entirely. He never argued that a ruler should abandon virtue. He argued that virtue without the capacity for firmness becomes a liability, because it signals to opportunistic people exactly how far they can go. The goal was never coldness. The goal was what he called virtu, a word that meant something closer to strength of character than simple goodness, the capacity to adapt, to hold boundaries, and to act decisively when action was required, rather than hoping good intentions alone would be enough to protect you. There is another layer to this that Machiavelli understood with striking clarity. One that connects directly to why some people seem to command a room the instant they walk into it. He believed that perception shapes reality far more than most people are willing to admit. It does not matter, in practical terms, whether you are actually as strong, as capable, or as unshakable as you appear. What matters is what other people believe about you, because people respond to their beliefs about you, not to some objective truth about your character that they cannot fully access anyway. This is not the same as dishonesty. It is the recognition that consistency, calm confidence, and controlled reactions build a perception over time, and that perception becomes, functionally, your reputation. This explains something that confuses almost everyone the first time they notice it. Two people can behave almost identically in a difficult situation, yet one earns quiet respect while the other earns quiet dismissal. The difference is rarely the action itself. It is the consistency of the pattern surrounding it. A person who reacts calmly once, after months of visible anxiety and constant apologizing, does not shift how they are perceived. A person who reacts calmly as part of an established, repeated pattern builds, brick by brick, the kind of reputation that eventually requires no explanation at all. Machiavelli also warned about a trap that catches especially kind, thoughtful people more than anyone else: the trap of over-explaining. He observed that rulers who constantly justified every decision, who sought approval before acting, who explained their reasoning at length to anyone who questioned them, appeared weaker, not more reasonable. Explanation, past a certain point, reads as apology. And apology, repeated often enough, reads as an admission that you did not have the right to act in the first place. This does not mean honesty should be abandoned. It means that confidence, in Machiavelli's world, often speaks in fewer words than people assume, and that over-justifying yourself to people who were never going to respect you anyway rarely changes their mind. It only reveals how much their opinion still controls you. The strongest people he studied, whether rulers, generals, or advisors, tended to say less than expected in moments of tension, not because they lacked words, but because they understood that unnecessary explanation cheapens a decision that should be allowed to simply stand on its own. So how does a person actually begin applying this in their own life, starting today, without becoming someone they do not recognize? Machiavelli's answer, translated into modern terms, starts with a simple internal shift. Stop treating other people's approval as something you need to survive, and start treating your own boundaries as something you are willing to enforce, calmly, consistently, without drama. This does not require confrontation. It requires the willingness to occasionally disappoint someone, without collapsing into guilt or over-explanation the moment they show displeasure. It also requires something Machiavelli returned to constantly throughout his writing: patience paired with timing. He believed that the worst mistake a person can make is acting from panic, desperation, or the fear of losing someone's approval. Decisions made from that place, he argued, almost always weaken your position rather than strengthen it, because everyone around you can sense desperation, even when it is carefully hidden behind polite language. The people who command the most lasting respect are rarely the ones who react fastest. They are the ones who wait, observe, and act deliberately, at exactly the moment it matters most. Machiavelli watched impulsive rulers burn through goodwill in weeks that patient, deliberate ones took years to build. And he considered this one of the clearest, most repeatable patterns in all of political life. The kind of pattern that shows up just as reliably in an ordinary conversation as it does in the fall of an empire. There is a final piece of this philosophy that most people miss entirely, and it might be the most important one. Machiavelli did not believe respect, once earned, was permanent. He believed it required constant, ongoing maintenance, the same consistency that built it in the first place. This is why people who suddenly change, who revert to old patterns of over-accommodation the moment they feel guilty or anxious, often lose respect just as quickly as they gained it. Respect, in Machiavelli's framework, is not a trophy you win once. It is a pattern you maintain, deliberately, for as long as you want it to last. And this is precisely why so many people experience a strange, painful confusion when respect they thought was secure suddenly disappears. It was never lost through a single dramatic event. It eroded quietly, the same way it was built, one inconsistent moment at a time, until the pattern that had earned it in the first place simply stopped being visible to the people who once relied on it. This is not a comfortable philosophy, and Machiavelli never claimed it would be. He was writing during one of the most brutal, unstable periods in Italian history, watching alliances collapse and rulers destroyed by the very kindness they thought would protect them. But strip away the historical context, and what remains is a genuinely useful map for anyone tired of being overlooked, taken advantage of, or quietly disrespected despite doing everything they were taught would earn them the opposite. The lesson was never to become cold or cruel. It was to stop confusing being agreeable with being respected, because history, and most people's own lives if they are honest about it, tend to prove those two things are rarely the same. Here is something deep worth sitting with long after this video ends. The respect you have spent years begging for from other people was likely never theirs to give in the first place. It was always something you had to build within yourself first, through the boundaries you were willing to hold and the consistency you were willing to maintain, long before anyone else's opinion of you ever had the chance to catch up. Most people spend their whole lives waiting for permission that was never anyone else's to grant. So ask yourself honestly, where in your own life have you mistaken constant accommodation for connection? And what might change if you finally stopped needing permission to be taken seriously? Starting with the very next moment someone asks more of you than they have any right to expect? If this shifted how you see the respect you have been chasing for years, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And stay close, because the next story goes even deeper into the minds that shaped how power and respect actually work.